Hello and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Donna Gibbs, author of Becoming Resilient, and a counselor who's been providing women and their families the hope and help they need for 20 years, is a national certified counselor, board certified professional Christian counselor, and licensed professional counselor supervisor. She serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Summit Wellness Centers, PLLC, and lives in North Carolina with her husband Mark and their 4 sons. So here to discuss her new book, Silencing Insecurity, Believing God's Truth About You, is our guest, Donna Gibbs. Donna, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much. True honor to be here with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you. You have made a difference. You have had an impact on so many people over your career. That we want to share that with our audience, and there are things that help shape us, form us, make us who we are today. So in order for us to really relate to who we are, we want to get to know who you are. So
Okay, sure.
let's go back to little Donna, and who were the influences in little Donna's life that helped shape your faith, helped shape either your confidence or your lack of confidence, and how you were able to navigate to get to where you are today?
Sure. There's so many directions that I could go with that. I'll try to go the short route and just say that, as a young child and even as a young teen, I did not have a relationship with God. In fact, I remember occasionally visiting a church and I would hear them speak of Christ or an enthusiasm about Him, and I honestly thought that was the most foreign thing in the world. I could not understand it. I recall at about probably age 16, I remember it was in the summertime. I was on the tennis team, but we were in practice, and I ran into the school to get my water bottle, and I met somebody new, and she introduced me to herself. She said, "My name is Janet, and I'm here to the school for the first time." She looked so young, I just assumed she was a student, but it was her first year teaching. And that was the first of many encounters in which she introduced me to the real Jesus and the one that I grew to have enthusiasm about. And of course, there were others that followed her along the way and took me under their wing and introduced me again to the discipleship, to how to have a deep relationship with Him. And so that's the easy side of it. But there were also some other challenging things that we all have a story. We all face struggles. And, one of those challenges in my teenage and early college, that aspect of my life was struggling to find my identity and finding it in the wrong places. And so that's part of my drive to even write this book. I've seen my story repeated so many times in my office, thousands of times. And I know if it's a part of my history and it's part of so many histories of those that I've sat across, then I know it's the story of just so many people.
Donna, as I listen to you tell the story, there's a whole 16-year window of mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, brothers and sisters that there's no reference or allusion to whatsoever. So it's almost as if this hole that it was developing or had developed in you that now is being filled with a knowledge of Jesus. That hole, we're not born with that hole. That hole is dug for us in different ways, not that we all don't have a God-shaped hole in our heart that Jesus wants and needs for us to fill, but there are those that help dig that hole and make that hole much bigger in our hearts, and it's by how we are spoken to, how we are positioned, how we are related to, as to how we understand relationship. And oftentimes, a concept of God, a loving Father, is a foreign concept because we didn't have that in the natural. And we look in the natural, and the loving Father concept isn't something we can relate to because we just don't have it. So it's the intangible that becomes so difficult to grab a hold of.
Yeah, and I'll clarify. For me, that childhood time and even early adolescence, it was a stable time. Parents were both there. My parents are still together. That's pretty incredible. But at that time, they weren't in a relationship with Christ either, and really didn't pursue that in the most intimate way until I was out of the home. And now, just amazing godly people leading others. But during that time in our lives, a relationship with God was just not, it wasn't talked about. It just wasn't a part of our family unit. And so gratefully, it became something that I was thirsty for. And they have as well. But yeah, you don't know sometimes that you have a void.
Right.
Until you're introduced to a relationship with God, and you had no idea that there was something that real that would make you feel that alive, that relationship with Him, that is purpose.
You know, it's interesting. You're talking about a picture of you grew up in the same field in your own way, looking at the family unit, which was intact and stable and was good foundational teaching, good ethics. I'm sure you were a good student. There were parameters set for you, expectations, boundaries, those kind of things.
Right.
And you weren't really searching until you found something you weren't looking for.
Right.
So, you know, it's interesting that every one of us comes to faith on the exact same day. And that's the day we're ready. And we share all that in common, and that's very, very exciting. We're having a little bit of trouble with your video again. We're going to try to press through that. The audio is clear, but we'll just have to make the best of what we have. In this pursuit, what led you to go the route of, after graduating high school, pursuing a college degree, and then looking into the area of counseling? Were you a psychology major? Did you specialize in biblical counseling? Where did this career come from?
Sure. So, you know, I think oftentimes with counselors, Christian counselors, you're either gifted or you're not. And I discovered early on that it was a gift that God had given me, and I had a thirst to better equip that gift. So yes, I did an undergraduate in psychology, and then in graduate school, I knew I wanted to pursue licensure in my state, and I wanted a professional license, but I wanted to have a biblical focus on that. And so at my school, I was the first person that they had who went through desiring a Christian counseling focus. And gratefully, they were very, very respectful of that, very supportive of that, allowed me to really gear my own training in that direction. And we've just been, continuing that route ever since.
You know, it's interesting that last week or the week before, we had a 2-hour special live here in studio with Dr. Larry Crabb, who is one of the, the fathers of leaving the psychological counseling world and saying, I'm not interested in diagnosing you as bipolar or multiple personality disorder. What I want to know is what is your sin response to your wound, to your circumstance. And if I can get to that, and I can get you to understand that you were created in God's image, and you have a sin, what's bothering you is your sin response to your circumstance. If I can take that out of you, we've got you healed. We don't need you on medication. We don't need you being referred to a psychopharmacologist. We're going to get to this root biblical issue, and it's fascinating the difference in approach between traditional counseling that we're taught in our psychology courses,
Right.
and biblical counseling, which is the same realm, but we're now dealing with spirit as opposed to brain or the thought life. It really becomes more biblically focused, because so a man thinks in his heart, so a man believes in his heart. If you believe in your heart and profess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. So it's very, very interesting. You have touched on a topic of insecurity that I think that the world would very much relate to, because we've become a comparative society.
Yes, absolutely.
There is no self-identity anymore being promoted, even from the pulpit. You become one of many. We drive this congregational view or small group view, but in reality, God is calling us for an individual identity, an individual relationship, and it doesn't matter where you fall on the Myers-Briggs. None of that plays a part in this. What plays a part in this is this struggle for identity in a world which is designed, corruptedly designed by Satan, to make you feel insecure. What percentage of your clientele struggle in this area that would cause you to rise up to write a book on silencing insecurity? But not just silencing insecurity. The flip side of that is believing God's truth about you, because that is the antidote, that is the medication.
Right. So, insecurity is not typically what someone will say as their presenting problem. It's not typically the reason when they first sit down and say, here's why I'm here. It's not generally what they're going to say. But 9 times out of 10, there's an ingredient of it somewhere along the way. And I say often, and I sincerely believe, it is the #1 struggle of women in America. But I also recall an anonymous poll, and I don't remember who did this research, but it was years ago. And it was a poll of Christian men asking some of those same questions. And the results of that indicated that Christian men struggled at least as much as females did with the exact same issue. And I do believe that we are in a culture of comparisons. There's a lot that feeds us and that we're surrounded with that sends that message: you don't measure up, you're not good enough. Much of that is just our economy driving that you're not good enough, and that's why you need this product. But it's hard sometimes for us to discern that. And certainly social media has exacerbated that in these last years.
It's obvious sometimes when somebody comes in and you can hear by their description of themselves that those aren't their words, and then you finally get to what tapes are you playing, and and whose voice are you hearing, and we go through that process of saying, okay, tell me the name of the person. Who's the one? Well, it was my coach. All right. Well, now we go through the process of forgiving the coach, and we go back and we reframe all of that, and that's an exercise we do. But it's unavoidable in life not to face failure, rejection, trauma. I look in the mirror. I feel 18. I'm almost 67 years old. Right? My mother's 92. All right. Beautiful, graceful, active, alive, but yet aging.
Yes.
Looking different than she looked 20 years ago. I look different than I looked 20 years ago. And finding comfort in the wrinkles, finding comfort in the bags, finding comfort in the change in the hair color. These are realities, but we've been so driven to become insecure with the outward, And that's not where God looks.
Mm-hmm. That is also the reason the very first chapter of this book, I focused on appearances and comparisons. And I do believe that this is one area that women may be hit even harder than men. It's, those early introductions, and there's a certain set of expectations for how you're to look. And you can look in any magazine, go to a movie, go into any high school or even any church, and quickly determine what that message is. But it often leaves males as well, but so many times females at a place where they feel that they can't measure up, and then when they do hit that, maybe they've had a baby and their body changes, or they begin to age and they hit an identity crisis with that. And I'll tell you, it's funny to me as I think about it, but not so much when I look at the big picture. One of the first toys that we give our little girls is a Barbie doll. And I don't know if you've ever seen this study. It was a university student who decided, she set out to see if Barbie doll were in real life proportions, what would her size actually be? And she'd be about 5'9", which is my height. But all of her proportions are quite different. And I've got that here. So let me read this off to you. And any female listening will probably have a, ah! Barbie would be 5'9", have a 39-inch bust, an 18-inch waist, 33-inch hips, and a size 3 shoe. And because of those proportions, she wouldn't even be able to stand up. But that's just an unspoken message that we give our young girls, that you're to look this way. It's impossible.
It's fascinating to me that in the Bible, God created only two peoples, Jews and Gentiles. The idea of ethnos, ethnic, was created by the Greeks to give us an ideal picture. They introduced this idea of the perfect person. Adonis is the perfect male. And it so gripped the world that racism, ethnic cleansing, racial division, all these things were birthed out of this striving for perfection as defined by man in a godless society, or in a polytheistic society. But in a monotheistic society, the acceptance of creating in the image of God in all form and format, meaning my interior, my heart, my soul, my spirit, and my exterior, meaning that God creates all of us differently and imbues us with different gifts, all of that. It's very hard to navigate and come to grips with that identity when somebody's telling you in your ear, you're not good enough. Or they said to you when you were 9 years old, you'll never amount to anything.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, I had those words said to me. And when I became promoted to a vice president of a very, very large multi-billion-dollar corporation, I went to my father and I said, you told me I would never amount to anything, and you were right. And he said, what do you mean I was right? I said, I didn't amount to anything. I amounted to something. And I really was very intentional about proving him wrong, because this had been, now it was at a time where I was at a rebellious age. It was a time when it was in the 50s. It was in a whole different time, Eastern European home, very different, and not to hold that against him, but the example is that I know there are millions of people who have been told by somebody in their life that you're heading down the wrong path, and if you head down this path, you'll never amount to anything. And that is a curse, and that is a lie, because God says something different. And that's what we have to get to. We're talking with Donna Gibbs, author of Silencing Insecurity, Believing God's Truth About You. In her book, she has a number of extraordinary insight, but in the area of approval and rejection, she has 10 questions that she has for you to ask yourself, that when we return from break, I'm going to go over those 10 questions because I think they are revelatory. I think that our audience will ask themselves this question and give themselves the answer, and will help them start a journey that if you and I just in this conversation can help somebody begin the journey to healing, then we've done what we came here to do. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Donna Gibbs, author of Silencing Insecurity, Believing God's Truth About You. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support. but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Donna Gibbs, author of Silencing Insecurity, Believing God's Truth About You. Donna, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Donna, on page 37 in your book, in the chapter on approval and rejection, you have 10 questions which I thought were very profound, because I don't think people really have an honest assessment of the fact that they really are quite normal in the fact that they're someone insecure. And we share a common unsettling kind of behavior, and we hide from it, but we really all need to confront it because it's not of God.
Right.
Share some of these questions with us, and why the first line, and I want you to read, after you read the questions, I want you to read the first line of the paragraph following it.
Sure. Okay, so I'll hit some of the questions that I might see most commonly in my office, okay? So, is it difficult for you to say no to others? Do you feel unusually elated when people admire or notice you? Is it difficult for you to hear criticism? Do you avoid close relationships to prevent opening yourself up to the risk of rejection? Do you sometimes find yourself trying to impress others? Do you tolerate inappropriate behavior in others because you find it too difficult to set boundaries? Do you work tirelessly to try to gain the approval of particular people in your life? I say particular with emphasis because oftentimes there are just particular people that approval is needed from. And of course, do you avoid confrontations with others for fear of the impact that will have on your relationship? And then that first line that you referenced, if you answered yes to any of these questions, then welcome to the majority.
See, this is real. We're now getting down to the reality of life. And I think that almost everybody would have answered yes to one or more. And if they were really honest, they might have answered yes to all of those, because at times in our life we are chameleons. We try to conform. And it's quite interesting that God would use the words to not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So life experiences, you say in the book, life experiences kind of bring a charge against us. We kind of look at it as a almost as a brand that we can't get rid of, we can't get out of. We're permanently stuck in this because this has happened to us. How do you view that, and how do you address that? Yeah,
I'll use an example. And this is a tough example for many listeners, but it's real. And so we know that over 50% of females experience some form of sexual assault prior to the age of 18. We also know that a percentage of males, and that's pushing probably 25%, experience the exact same thing. That is an example of something that if we are not intentional, it will take a charge against us. It will define us. And the message is, you deserve this, or you are dirty, or you are this thing. And the reality is that no circumstance or experience or trauma of life can define us. Only God can define us. And it's so important to make the distinction between the experience of something and the identity of it. Otherwise, we'll stay stuck right there. And even where something traumatic stopped, the assault on our minds and our identity will continue on.
in marriages, and I see a lot of this in marriages, there are compromises made, there are suspicions which arise, there are boundaries which are crossed, and accommodations are made for those boundaries to be crossed. And then trust begins to erode, and the whole dynamic changes, and that brings about a separation and oftentimes a divorce. And it's not unique to non-Christians or Christians, it's universal
Right.
that it happens. What can we do to help people get to a point of transparency to say, you know, counseling is not something that that's a last resort. Counseling is formalized mentoring. It should be an extension of the mentoring process. We should have mentors, and if there are issues, we need to then escalate to a counselor to mediate, to arbitrate, to guide. That's great, but it's not the end all and the be all. But it's not it's not an anathema to seek out counseling. How do we avoid letting things get too far and too broken and make them so personal that they become irreparable?
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much because there is still a taboo about counseling. And I think when people hear the word counseling, they think someone who is mentally ill, or they think an institution or something. And that's not it at all. You know, as you've done some of this work, the people that I'm working with, they're just everyday people, just like me, you know, just like you. But I think that we begin to break the taboo when those everyday people share and they are transparent and they say, this is something that I was going through, and I sought a counselor who could facilitate this process, and then they make it okay. And I think of, you know, some of the people that I've worked with over the years, and a few in particular who were very, very successful, very, very well-known people. And when they were willing to be transparent about it, they gave a host of other people the freedom, the permission to feel that it was okay for them too. That's why I say I thank you. You're just sharing even a few minutes ago about some of your story, because other people will relate with that, and it gives them permission to say, okay, maybe I can talk about my story with someone. It's just a process of a counselor facilitating a journey toward freedom and a journey towards truth.
God says that we were created in His image. God says He's endowed with us certain gifts to each one of us, and they are unique gifts, and we are uniquely and wonderfully and marvelously made in His image. But people can come along and chip away at what our belief system is, and because of the strength of their argument, because of their forcefulness, or because even sometimes of our timidity, we will surrender or submit to that, and then that becomes our self-definition, and we take it to the step of then self-medicating or turning to other things to cover the pain, and that then puts us into an even worse spiral. So when we look at this excuse me, process, which hurt is complex. We need to get to the root of it. But if people find themselves turning to other areas to cover the pain, that is in itself an acknowledgement that there is a pain, and that's when you should seek help. And it's not dependent on whether or not your spouse or your partner or your parent or your brother or your sister or your teacher are willing to go with you. This is something you need to do for yourself, because this is the relationship you're responsible for with God. You may not, it may be noble to say you're doing it for the kids. It may be noble to say you're doing it for the marriage. But the truth of the matter is, you have to do it for yourself. how do we get people to understand that there's a world out there influencing our daughters, there's a world out there influencing our sons, there's a world out there influencing our spouses, there's a world out there that is impacting us. What can we do to help them, insulate them, protect them, help them be defined by God and believing God's truth about them as opposed to what the world, their bullies, their Facebook, their Instagram, their Pinterest, all these things.
Oh, yeah.
All those pressure points, touch points.
Sure.
What can we do?
It's surrounding them, and I do believe that all of those pressures and all those messages are surrounding this generation far more than they did our generations previous. They're being more inundated by that, and so how do we help them? First of all, that we have our own identity straight, and that we are in agreement with who God says He is, and therefore in agreement with who He says we are. So much of that Christian journey is just agreeing with Him. And so we submit that. And when we can genuinely submit that and then live life every day, living that out, then our daughters, I only have boys, but the same is true of young boys, that we're showing them that. Because if I am routinely speaking out about how worthless I am, or showing evidence that I think I'm not good enough, that daughter, that son, they're going to pick up on that. And they inherit that belief about themselves. And so that's where it starts. It starts with us. And then it is day by day as they are, if something takes a charge against them, then we're helping them to process it. You know, some social media attack, some bully, some coach that was harsh, or a girlfriend broke up, or a boyfriend broke up, that we, as they live life, we're helping them to process it in light of who they really are, not what the world is saying they are.
Donna, as we look at our loved ones, whether or not they're our spouses, our close friends, our children, our parents, our siblings, what are some of the things that we could look for that would make us aware that they are struggling with an area? There are self-deprecating words. There are things that give us an idea when somebody's constantly putting themselves down.
Sure.
So we hear that and we feel for them. What should we do with that?
Right, introducing them to truth. You know, sometimes the only message that we get is an incorrect message. And so introducing them to truth is refreshing. I think of times when I've sat here in my office and the presenting problem was depression or anxiety, but then we discover it's your false beliefs that are creating those symptoms. And so then when I introduce them to truth, that is refreshing. We're thirsty for truth. And when then they can begin to reconcile that, that is powerfully healing for them. But there's a whole cascade of different symptoms somebody might have when they're wrestling with insecurity. It could be the negative self-talk. It could be the emotional instability. It could be the relationship chaos, or there's all kinds of things. It just makes a mess in general. So it looks different for every person, but the answer is the same for every person.
It's interesting you say that. We have 72% of Americans, somewhere approximately that number, who identify as Christians. Mm-hmm. But we have the same number of Christians who are biblically illiterate, meaning they don't know what God says they are. Right. They know what the pastor says on Sunday, but they don't know what God says. In my own personal journey, I was with the rabbis until I was 40. Learning, being taught by great rabbis, by wonderful people, men of God, but I heard what the rabbis had to say. I could quote the rabbis. but I didn't know what God had to say. And I
Yes.
went to my rabbi and I said to him, I want to know what God has to say. And he said, well, you're going to have to go find out for yourself. I spent 4 years searching, and I wound up in a Messianic synagogue, and I heard the gospel preached in the language I understood, and I came to faith. I was then introduced at 44 years old to myself for the very first time in my life. I met me. I didn't like me. I didn't like what I had done to people. I didn't like the fact that I'd climbed the corporate ladder and walked on the backs of everybody to get there, that I would have done anything to anybody at any time to get what I wanted to accomplish. I didn't like anything that I saw, but I loved the message that here was a man named Paul.
Yes.
Who cheered on the stoning death of a fellow Jew who could be looked upon no different than I looked at myself. And yet he was being used of God to bring nations to faith and to bring people to faith and to become an example and an expositor of a truth as to who my real identity was. And so I had to make the choice of, am I going to believe what this says, or am I going to believe what the world says?
Right.
And that was a hard, and for me as a Jew, I had to be willing to count the cost. For a Gentile, there is no cost. You don't lose family members. You don't lose a nation, Israel. You don't lose that. You had to be willing to become an orphan in order to become a child. Very, very interesting dynamic. But in this process, I had to come face to face with who I am, or who I was, and then allow God to change that. That was not an overnight process. That is a work that is in process and been in process for over 22 years.
Yes.
Do we put, by the same way we have this false expectation, the false insecurity, do we also have a false expectation in immediacy of, oh, now I have the answer and everything's going to be all better?
Right. Yeah. And I think that sometimes we do. We want to take a pill and everything be fine. And one of the things that I talk about in this particular book is I talk about wholeness, but understanding that wholeness is a relative word, because this side of heaven, we will experience not complete wholeness. Because we still are going to deal with charges against us. We're still going to deal with struggles. And in times of stressful seasons in our life, we may regress to our old way of thinking. And we have to continuously and deliberately work towards reminding ourselves of the truth. But, you mentioned Paul. What a beautiful example of this, because if there's anyone who could have been stuck with insecurities, it would have been Paul. Because he had much to feel some regret about. He experienced the rejection of a lot of Christians when he came to faith. But he didn't allow those things to define him, and God assigned him a new name. And that is, we think of that in different times in Scripture of significant times in which someone was assigned a new name. And so I often encourage people, allowing God to redefine you, make you a new person, as if you get a new name with that, a new identity with that. But what a beautiful example of wholeness to the degree that I think you can have it this side of eternity. Paul is a beautiful example of that.
The one thing that you emphasize in the book is that God has the last word.
Yes.
And God is giving us a biblical example to move us to give us freedom from insecurity. Being dependent is something that we have made a misnomer. On the 4th of July every year, I preach the same message, and that independence is 2 words, not 1. And that Independence Day is to be in dependence upon the Lord. Independence is 2 words, not 1. And if we look at that I'm okay to be dependent upon God, then I don't need to fight for my independence and for my unique identity. He's already got all that lined up. So if I am in dependence upon him for my identity, then I can believe his truth because I know him to be true and just, and God is not a liar. He's not a man that he should lie.
Right.
And so as we take this journey, Donna, in silencing insecurity, helping people to believe God's truth about them, I strongly encourage every man to read this book. That you'll find that the insecurities that you have may be old, but it's time to dust them off and realize that for you, male or female, it is never too late to be who God created you to be, and for you to rejoice in the beauty of the security of God has given you gifts that if you're not surrounded by people that appreciate them, then you might need to change the people you surround yourself with. Okay? God is the God of change. God prunes to bring new growth. He disciplines to help us change our behaviors. If we know him, then we know his heart for us is perfect love. His heart for us is perfect wholeness in him, and that he wants us to become secure in the knowledge that he does not make a mistake, and you are not a mistake. You are the glory and the righteousness of the one who made you. That is the message of silencing insecurity, believing God's truth about you, and knowing that God loves you. Donna Gibbs, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. I just thank you for the work you do and for the lives you touch.
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
God bless you.
We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.